I'd rather die than belong to you, the Lakota woman said, her voice sharp and unyielding. When the wanderer broke her shackles at dawn, the endless sprawl of the Mojave Desert stretched before them, harsh and relentless, swallowing every sound except the faint wail of wind threading through the rocky gorges. The wanderer rode alone, a man weighed down by too many yesterdays and too few tomorrows. His horse's hooves struck the cracked earth in a rhythm that echoed his pulse, slow, worn, but alive. He'd seen enough blood and treachery to know peace was a fable. Yet he rode on, chasing something he couldn't name. The sun was just cresting the horizon when he came across the smoldering ruins of a campsite. Thin trails of smoke still hung in the air. The sand was darkened with ash and grief. He dismounted, his eyes scanning the scene with care. That's when he saw her, chained to a splintered post, half hidden in shadow, her wrists torn and bleeding against the cold steel. She was young. Her long black hair knotted with dust. Faint tribal markings adorned her face. But her eyes, they weren't those of a captive. They burned with pride, rage, and something fiercer, defiance. The wanderer froze, watching her breathe, steady and deliberate, as if she'd already made her peace with death. The men who'd left her there were long gone, likely thinking she'd never be found. He stepped closer, his boots grinding on the gravelly dirt. She didn't flinch. Crouching to meet her gaze, he saw no fear, only raw resolve. Without a word, he pulled a knife from his belt and cut the chain binding her to the post. She didn't thank him, didn't move either. He gestured toward his horse, offering a canteen. Her stare pierced him, lips parched, eyes heavy with accusation. Finally, she took the canteen, drank a few careful sips, and turned her head away. He could tell it stung her to accept help, but thirst bowed to no pride. Hey, if you're gripped by this story, hit that like and subscribe button to keep these tales coming. Where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know. He wasn't one for words. Never had been. But as the day turned blistering and the sand scorched their boots, he knew he couldn't just leave her. They traveled in silence for miles. Every time he tried to speak, her quiet answered louder. When night fell, he built a small fire and offered her some dried meat. She ate without looking at him, her hands trembling from exhaustion. Yet her eyes never faltered. He noticed how she kept watching the horizon, as if expecting her kin to step out of the dark. But he knew the truth. No one was coming. 2 days passed this way. The wanderer began to understand her silence. It wasn't arrogance. It was loss. She'd lost her people, maybe her family, maybe everything. Her heart was buried somewhere in that burned-out camp, but her spirit still blazed. On the third day, they reached a crumbling outpost near a jagged ridge. He reined in his horse and turned to her. "You can rest here tonight," he said softly. She didn't respond. The cuffs still clung to her wrists, a brutal reminder of her suffering. He hesitated, then stepped closer. She drew back slightly, her body tense, ready to resist. "Easy," he murmured, reaching for the chain with slow, careful hands. She stayed still as he gripped the metal and twisted. The lock gave a dull click, then broke apart. The sound was small, but echoed like a storm. She stared at her freed wrists, then at him. For a fleeting moment, something like gratitude flickered in her eyes. Then it vanished. She straightened her shoulders and spoke for the first time, her voice trembling but fierce. "I'd rather die than belong to you." The words hit him harder than a bullet. He stood frozen, the chain dangling from his hand. He wanted to tell her he didn't want to own her, that he was just trying to do right. But the words wouldn't come. She turned away, her back straight, her pride shining like tempered steel in the sunlight. In that moment, he saw her for what she was. Not just a woman freed from chains, but freedom itself. Unbroken and pure. Yo, if this story's hitting you, smash that like and subscribe for more. Where are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments. He stayed silent as she walked a few paces away, staring into the desert as if her lost world waited just beyond the dunes. The wanderer knelt, picked up the broken chain, and tossed it aside. He didn't call her back.
He just watched as her steps slowed, her legs shaking with fatigue. For the first time, he realized she was running, not just from him, but from everything that carried the weight of her pain. That night she didn't sleep. He saw her silhouette by the dying fire, fingers rubbing her wrists, eyes reflecting the flames. He wanted to tell her she was safe, but he knew safety wasn't what she sought. She wanted her honor, her vengeance, her home, things no man could give back. As the first rays of dawn touched the gorges, he caught her glancing at him briefly. Her face softened for a heartbeat before turning back to the horizon. He didn't know it then, but those words, "I'd rather die than belong to you," would burn in his memory forever, shaping everything yet to come. By the time the sun rose higher, the wanderer had decided to follow her from a distance. She didn't want his help, but the desert was merciless. He watched her stumble across the sand, determined but weak. When she finally collapsed near a dry riverbed, he approached quietly, lifting her gently and offering water. She tried to push him away, but her strength was gone. Her eyes met his, those same fierce eyes, but now there was no hate, only exhaustion. He carried her to the shade and waited until she opened her eyes again. When she woke, she spoke her name for the first time. Tala. He repeated it softly, the word unfamiliar but beautiful. In broken English, she shared fragments of her story. Her village torched, her brothers slain, her people scattered. The men who chained her had destroyed everything she loved. The wanderer sat in silence, guilt gnawing at him. Once, not long ago, he'd ridden with men who might have done such things. He'd left them because he couldn't stomach the screams anymore. He didn't tell her that. Some truths were too heavy to speak. Days turned into weeks. They rode together, not as friends, not as enemies, just two survivors bound by the same unforgiving land. Sometimes she'd hum a song from her tribe, soft and haunting. Sometimes he'd listen to the wind and wonder if this was what redemption felt like. Slowly, the silence between them turned into understanding. He taught her to handle a revolver. She taught him to read the land, where the rat loose hid, how to find water in barren soil. They began to trust each other, though neither would ever admit it aloud. One night, as they camped near towering cliffs, she asked why he saved her. He stared into the fire and said, "Because I couldn't stand watching another soul die for nothing." She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "No one saves without a reason." He didn't answer. Their fragile peace shattered one evening when a band of bounty hunters found them. Gunfire ripped through the quiet. The wanderer drew his gun in an instant, pushing Tala behind a rock. She fought beside him, her rifle steady, eyes blazing. They battled like two storms colliding, each shot ringing with rage and defiance. He was hit once, then twice, but kept firing until the last man fell. When it was over, the world was still again, except for the sound of his ragged breathing. Tala knelt beside him, pressing her hands to his wound. He looked up at her face, the woman who'd sworn she'd rather die than be his, and smiled faintly. "Guess I'm yours now." Tears filled his eyes, but she shook her head. "No," she said softly. "You are free." He smiled again, weaker this time. "So are you." His eyes closed, and with the rising sun, his breath faded into silence. She sat there for hours, the wind carrying strands of her hair across his face. When she finally buried him near the cliffs, she placed the broken chain beside his grave. Not a symbol of bondage, but of what he'd broken within himself. Tala stood there for hours, her shadow stretching across the sand. Then she turned, walking toward the horizon. She didn't look back. Her steps were steady, her heart scarred but strong. She was free. Not because someone freed her, but because she'd never let herself be owned. The wind carried her song through the valley, the same mournful tune she'd sung by the fire, echoing off the canyon walls. And in that song lived the memory of the man who tried to give her back what the world had stolen, her freedom, her pride, her right to choose her own destiny. She vanished into the golden light, leaving behind nothing but silence, a grave, and a legend born from pain and courage. The story of the woman who said, "I'd rather die than belong to you," and meant it with every heartbeat of a soul that refused to bow to anyone. Wow, what a journey! If this story moved you, give this video some serious hype. Smash that like button, subscribe, and share it with everyone you know. Let's spread this legend far and wide.